Hello there, George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. Welcome back to the Northwind PowerApps series. In this video, we're switching gears again from PowerApps to SQL Server to look at the stored procedure that powers the CRUD logic for order details. If you watched the last video, you saw how PowerApps calls a stored procedure and handles its result. Now we'll dive into that stored procedure, how it works, how it's structured, and why it's built that way. The procedure we're looking at is called CRUDOrderDetail. It's what I call a master stored procedure. It takes in all of the parameters needed to either create, read, update, or delete an order detail. All of these operations are handled by sub-procedures, so this master is basically a traffic cop. It routes the logic based on a parameter. The name of that parameter is CRUD type. It can have one of four values: 1 for create, 2 equals read, 3 for update, or 4 for delete. Every call to this procedure must pass in this flag. Let's look at how CRUDOrderDetail handles that CRUD type flag. CRUDOrderDetail, the traffic cop, uses conditional logic blocks to call one of the four CRUD operations. If the CRUD type is 1, the traffic cop directs that to the add order sub-procedure. If it's 2, it directs it to the read. 3, it directs it to the update. 4, it directs it to the delete. By the way, the naming convention I adopted for subs is the Z prefix to remind me that these stored procs belong to this set and shouldn't be used outside of that set. The last step in the CRUDOrderDetail is a custom error message. If an error bubbles up from one of the subs, this stored procedure catches it and turns it into a user-friendly error message that CRUDOrderDetail can send back to the PowerApps user. Let's open SQL Server Management Studio and look at the stored proc. At the top of the procedure, we put a comment to remind ourselves what the CRUD types are. Let's talk about the parameters. In addition to the CRUD type parameter, which tells the master how to direct the request, this stored proc takes in values for all editable or updatable fields in the order details table. Order detail ID, that's the primary key. Order ID, foreign key to the orders table. Product ID, foreign key to the products table. The unit price, the discount, and the order detail status ID. Plus 3 output parameters which pass values back to PowerApps. Parameters have default values. That's important for compatibility with PowerApps, which expects every parameter to exist even if it's not used in the current operation. PowerApps, as I like to say, wants what it wants. Conditional logic. Let's scroll down and look at the conditional logic. I've collapsed the various sections so you can just see the highlights. If the CRUD type is 1, we execute the add order detail stored procedure. If CRUD type is 2, we execute select. If CRUD type is 3, update. 4, delete. We'll dive into the details of those next. As you'd expect, this master stored procedure sends in the parameters needed to create a new order. That does not include the order detail ID. That's going to be generated after we create that new record, and it will be passed back through the output parameter called local ID. We don't send any default values into add order, and we'll see why when we get to that level of detail. For the order detail status ID, we set it to 1, which is the new status for all new order details. Now let's look at add order detail. we pass in from the master to the sub here the order ID, and that is a required field. You can't add an order detail if you do not have an order to add it to. Product is the same. You can't add an order detail line without a product. The quantity will default to 1. The discount will default to 0. The unit price will default to 0. And again, we're repeating the default status for order details. We're going to pass back the local ID once we generate it here, any error code if there's an error, and any error message if there's an error. Now we start to process the request to add a new record. We have a business rule disallowing duplicate products in an order. At this point, we're adding a new order detail. So the only issue we're concerned about is whether we're trying to add a second order detail line that would violate that constraint by putting a second order detail line with the same product. However, if we rely on the check constraint to raise an error, we're going to get back a rather ugly SQL Server database error. Rather than let that happen, I added a custom data validation step inside this stored procedure. It requires a local parameter, local product in order, as an integer. When we check for a duplicate product, we count the number of order detail ID values in the order details table, where the order ID is the same as the order we're trying to update now or add a product to now, and the product ID already exists. If that number is not 0, which means there is a record in order details with that order ID and product, we set a custom error code, set a custom error message, and return, which bails us out of this attempt to add a new record, bubbles that error back up to the master CRUD order detail stored procedure, which passes that error back to PowerApps, where we present the user with a custom user-friendly error message about why they couldn't add that order detail. If we pass the data validation step, we proceed to add our new order detail. Supporting information comes next. When we add the record, we're going to indicate whether the product is available to cover the quantity ordered in that order detail. If there isn't sufficient product available, we want to know whether this product is already on order so that we can fulfill it at a future date. Or we want to know whether we're in a no stock status, which means we don't have enough available and we don't have any on order. Depending on whether we have quantity available or not, we set the order detail status ID 1, which would be the default. It's allocated. 5 means it's on order, or 4 means it's in no stock status. This is the value we will pass then into our insert statement. Once the insert is complete, we retrieve the value of the newly inserted primary key from scope identity, set that equal to local ID. Local ID is one of the output parameters which will be sent back through the master stored procedure onto PowerApps. We set the error code to 0, meaning no errors occurred, and just a courtesy message saying that we added the order detail. If an error occurs during this final step where we insert the record, we have a general purpose catch. We set the local ID to 0 because we did not get a new record created. That means the local ID will bubble back to PowerApps as 0. We'll send whatever error code was raised. In this case, I don't know what that error number would be, so I can't trap it and give the user a more user-friendly one. I'm just going to let it bubble back up. That's how the add order detail branch of the master stored procedure for order details works. The other three steps, read, update, or delete, are very similar. We'll look at those in depth in a later video. So that's a taste of the SQL side of the story. Everything we saw in PowerApps depends on this structure being rock solid. If you're an Access developer moving to PowerApps, think of these stored procedures like your VBA functions. They're modular, reusable, and centralized. Thanks for watching. In the next video, we'll apply this same pattern to a different part of the app. Until then, like and subscribe and keep building smarter.